Jake Morrison felt the metal floor shake under his boots as another explosion rocked the TDS Valiant. Red warning lights flashed across the bridge while alarms screamed through the ship's speakers. The evacuation of Verne 7 was not going as planned. "Captain, we've lost main engines," shouted Lieutenant Corinne Hayes from her station. "Hull breach on decks 3 and 4. "We're going down." Jake gripped the command chair as the ship tilted sideways. Through the view screen, he could see the planet below. Green fields stretched across the surface, broken by small settlements where the Varanaki people lived. The deer-like aliens had been farming this world for thousands of years. Now they were running for their lives. The Kethmori had found them. Jake had fought the insect-like creatures for 3 years. The parasitic aliens consumed everything in their path, turning entire worlds into dead rocks. The Galactic Coalition had finally pushed them back, but cleanup operations like this one often went wrong. A small group of Kethmori had hidden on Verne 7, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Sir, evacuation ships are pulling back," called out Ensign Pete Collins from communications. "The Kethmori are launching spores into the atmosphere. Command says it's too dangerous to continue rescue operations." Jake's jaw tightened. Below them, millions of Varanaki were trapped. The gentle farmers had no weapons, no military training. They grew food and raised families. Against the Kethmori, they might as well be flowers trying to fight a forest fire. "Captain, we need to abandon ship," Corinne said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The escape pods are ready." Jake looked. At the tactical display, 12 Kethmori scout ships circled the planet like vultures. Their bioweapons were already spreading through the lower atmosphere. In 6 hours, every living thing on the surface would be dead or transformed into more Kethmori. "Launch the pods," Jake ordered. "Get everyone to the rally point." "What about you, sir?" Corinne asked. Jake was already moving toward the weapons locker. "I'm staying." "Sir, that's suicide." "The ship is breaking apart." Jake pulled out his combat gear and started putting it on. The familiar weight of his body armor felt good against his shoulders. His rifle clicked into place on his back. Extra ammunition went into his belt pouches. He had enough supplies for maybe a week if he was careful. "The Varanaki don't have a chance without help," he said. "Someone needs to buy them time. Captain, please." "The Coalition will send another fleet when the spores clear." Jake shook his head. "That will take months. These people will be dead by tomorrow." The ship shuddered again. Through the hull breach, Jake could see one of the escape pods launching. Its small engine burned bright as it headed for the fleet gathering at the edge of the system. Good. His crew would make it home. Jake grabbed his emergency pack and headed for the shuttle bay. The Valiant's lone shuttle was damaged, but still flyable. He had maybe one landing before it fell apart completely. "This is Captain Morrison," he said into his communicator. "I'm taking the shuttle down to provide ground support. Tell command that someone needs to help these people." "Jake, don't do this," Corinne's voice came through his earpiece. "We can find another way." "Take care of the crew," he said. "That's an order." Jake sealed his helmet and climbed into the shuttle. The controls sparked when he touched them, but the engine started. He looked back at the Valiant one last time. The ship had been his home for 5 years. Now it was dying, just like everything else in this war. The shuttle dropped away from the ship and fell toward the planet. Jake fought the damaged controls as the atmosphere grabbed the small craft. Below him, he could see smoke rising from Varanaki settlements. The Kethmori were already attacking. He brought the shuttle down hard in a field outside the main settlement. The landing gear collapsed and the shuttle skidded across the dirt, throwing up clouds of dust. Jake unbuckled himself and grabbed his gear. The shuttle's engine was on fire. He had maybe 10 minutes before the fuel tanks exploded. Jake ran toward the settlement. The buildings were beautiful in their simplicity. The Varanaki built with living wood that grew into the shapes they needed. Their homes curved like giant flowers, with walls that breathed and roofs that collected rainwater. It was the most peaceful place Jake had ever seen. The screaming started as he reached the first buildings. Kethmori warriors poured through the settlement like a black tide. They stood 7 feet tall on 4 legs, with claws that could cut through steel. Their faces were nightmare combinations of insect and skull, with too many eyes and mouths full of needle teeth. They moved fast and killed faster. Jake saw a group of Varanaki families trapped in the town square. The aliens were trying to protect their children, but they had no weapons. Their large eyes were wide with fear. Their fur, normally a soft brown, had turned pale with terror. They made soft clicking sounds as they tried to call to each other. A Kethmori warrior charged toward a small Varanaki child. The little one had fallen behind the others and was crying for its parents. The warrior raised its claws, ready to strike. Jake's rifle cracked. The bullet took the warrior in the center of its chest, spinning it around. It hit the ground hard and did not get up. "Hey!" Jake shouted, running into the square. "Over here!" The other Kethmori turned toward him. Their multiple eyes focused on this new threat. Jake counted 8 of them, all bigger than him, all armed with natural weapons that could tear him apart. He had been fighting these things for 3 years. He knew their weaknesses. Jake rolled behind a market stall as claws raked the air where his head had been. He came up firing, putting 2 bullets into the nearest warrior's leg joint. The creature stumbled, and Jake's 3rd shot finished it off. The Varanaki watched in amazement as the lone human moved through their settlement like a ghost. He used every piece of cover, every shadow, every angle. His rifle never seemed to run out of bullets. Every shot found its target. The Kethmori were dangerous, but they were not smart. They relied on fear and numbers. Against a trained human soldier who knew their patterns, they were just big, angry insects. Jake killed the last warrior as the sun began to set. He reloaded his rifle and looked around the square. The Varanaki families were still there, staring at him with their large, gentle eyes. They had never seen anything like what he had just done. An elderly Varanaki approached him slowly. Its fur was silver with age, and it wore simple robes that marked it as a village elder. It stopped a few feet away and made a series of soft clicking sounds. Jake did not understand the language, but he could guess what it meant. "Thank you," he nodded to the elder, then looked up at the sky. The sun was setting, but this was just the beginning. There were more Kethmori out there, and they would come back. The evacuation fleet was gone. The coalition thought this world was lost. Jake Morrison checked his ammunition and started walking toward the next settlement. He had a long night ahead of him and an even longer war to fight. But for the first time in 3 years, he was not fighting for the coalition or for humanity. He was fighting for the gentle farmers who grew food and raised families and deserved to live in peace. He was fighting for VEREN-7. Behind him, the Varanaki elder watched the human disappear into the growing darkness. It made a note in its memory about this day, this moment when a stranger had fallen from the sky to save them. It was the beginning of a legend that would last for centuries. 5 years had passed since Jake Morrison first set foot on VEREN-7. The crash site of his shuttle had become a small shrine where Varanaki children left flowers and carved wooden figures. Jake had told them many times that he was just a regular human, but they did not seem to believe him. He sat in the morning sun outside his simple house, cleaning his rifle. The weapon had saved countless lives over the years. Every Kethmori on the planet was dead now, but Jake kept his gear in perfect condition. Old habits from his military training never died. "Jake, friend," called a familiar voice. Jake looked up to see Sirinth approaching. The elderly Varanaki had been the village elder when Jake first arrived. Now he served as speaker for the entire northern continent. His silver fur had grown whiter with age, but his large brown eyes still held the same gentle wisdom. "Good morning, Sirinth," Jake said. He had learned the Varanaki language during his 2nd year on the planet. The clicking sounds and soft whistles had been difficult at first, but now he spoke it almost perfectly. "The council wishes to speak with you," Sirinth said. "There is news from the sky." Jake set down his rifle and followed the elder through the settlement. The Varanaki had rebuilt their homes after the Kethmori attacks, but they had also added new features. Jake had taught them about defensive positions and warning systems. Hidden beneath their beautiful curved buildings were tunnels and supply caches that could keep the population safe for months. The council building was the largest structure in the settlement. Inside, 12 Varanaki elders sat in a circle on woven mats. They all turned to watch Jake enter. Even after 5 years, many of them still looked at him with something close to worship. "Sit, friend Jake," said Elder Moranka, gesturing to a special chair they had made for him. It was sized for a human and decorated with carvings that told the story of his arrival. Jake sat down, feeling uncomfortable as always with the formal attention. "What news do you have?" "Ships came from the void," Sirine H said. "Not coalition ships. These ones had different marks." "They spoke to us through the message box you built," Jake nodded. He had constructed a basic radio system using parts from his crashed shuttle. It allowed the Varanaki to communicate with passing ships, though few vessels came to this remote world. "What did they want?" Jake asked. "They called themselves traders," said Elder Verhan, a younger Varanaki with bright blue patterns on his fur. "They said they had heard stories about our world, about the great warrior who protects us." Jake sighed. Over the years, word had spread through the outer systems about the human who had stayed behind after the war. Traders and explorers sometimes came looking for him, drawn by curiosity or the hope of profit. "They wanted to take some of our people," Sirine H continued. "They said Varanaki would make good workers for their mining operations. They offered metal tools and energy weapons in trade." Jake's hands clenched into fists. He had seen what happened to peaceful species when they were forced into industrial labor. The traders were little better than slavers. "What did you tell them?" he asked. "We told them to speak with you," said Elder Morinka. "We said the Skywalker would decide what was best for our people." Jake closed his eyes. The Varanaki had started calling him Skywalker after he fell from the heavens to save them. He had tried to stop the title, but it had stuck. Now it was spreading beyond the planet. "Where are these traders now?" Jake asked. "They made camp at the old landing field," Verhan said. "They said they would wait 3 days for an answer." Jake stood up. "I'll go talk to them." "We will come with you," Sirine H said. "No," Jake said firmly. "Stay here. If things go badly, you'll need to protect the settlements." Jake walked to his house and put on his combat gear. The armor was older now, patched and repaired many times, but it still worked. His rifle hung familiar and comfortable on his back. He had not needed to use it against other humans for 5 years. He hoped today would not change that. The old landing field was a flat area of packed dirt about 2 miles from the main settlement. Jake could see the trader ship sitting there like a metal tick on the landscape. It was ugly and poorly maintained, with scorch marks on the hull and weapons that had been added without care for design. 3 humans stood near the ship. They wore mismatched armor and carried weapons that looked expensive but not well cared for. Jake recognized the type immediately. These were not legitimate traders. They were pirates who had gotten too old or too careful for direct raiding. "You must be the famous Skywalker," said the tallest of the 3. He was a thin man with scars on his face and cold blue eyes. "I'm Captain Rex Murphy. These are my associates, Tony and Luce." Jake stopped about 20 feet away from them. "Close? Enough to talk, far enough to react if things went wrong." "I hear you're interested in my friends," Jake said. "Friends?" Rex laughed. "Come on, soldier, we know what you are." "Human military, probably special forces." "You can't tell me you actually care about these dear people." "I care about them a lot," Jake said quietly. "Look, let's be practical here," Rex continued. "This is a dead-end world. Nothing happens here. You could come with us, see the galaxy again. We could use someone with your skills." "And the Varanaki?" Jake asked. "They're not your responsibility," said Tony, a heavy-set man with a cybernetic arm. "You did your duty. You saved them from the bugs. Now it's time to get back to the real world." Jake looked at the 3 men. They were armed and dangerous, but they were not soldiers. They were bullies who had grown used to taking what they wanted from people who could not fight back. "Here's my answer," Jake said. "You have 1 hour to leave this world. Don't come back." Rex's face darkened. That's not very friendly, Skywalker. We're offering you a way out of this backwater farm. I'm not looking for a way out, Jake said. Maybe we should take a few of those dear people anyway, said Luis, the youngest of the three. Show the galaxy that the great Skywalker isn't so tough. Jake's rifle was in his hands before any of them could blink. The safety was off and the barrel was pointed at Rex's chest. You have 59 minutes, Jake said. The three pirates looked at him with new respect. Rex raised his hands slowly, but his eyes were calculating. You can't watch them all the time, he said. Sooner or later you'll slip up. Try me, Jake said. Rex signaled to his men and they backed toward their ship. This isn't over, Skywalker. Word will spread. Other people will come looking for you. Looking for them. Let them come, Jake said. The pirate ship lifted off with a roar of badly tuned engines. Jake watched it disappear into the sky, then walked back to the settlement. He found Scifistories H and the other elders waiting for him. The bad sky men are? Gone, Sirenth said. It was not a question. For now, Jake said, but they were right about one thing. Others will come. Then we must be ready, said Elder Verhan. Will you teach us to fight? Jake looked around at the peaceful faces of the Varanaki. They were farmers and builders, artists and teachers. The idea of turning them into warriors felt wrong, but Rex was right. Jake could not protect everyone all the time. If more pirates came, or if governments decided the Varanaki were a resource to be exploited, the people would need to defend themselves. I'll teach you, Jake said, but we do this the right way. Defense only, protection of your families and your world. We understand, Scifistories H said. The Skywalker will show us the way, Jake sighed. The title was getting worse, not better. But as he looked at the trusting faces around him, he realized it did not matter what they called him. These people had become his family. He would protect them with his life, and apparently he would teach them to do the same. 20 years had passed since Jake Morrison first fell from the sky to save the Varanaki people. His dark hair had turned silver and lines marked his face, but his eyes still held the same determination that had driven him to stay behind all those years ago. Jake stood in the Great Hall of Memory, watching young Varanaki students copy text from the stone tablets that covered the walls. The tablets contained everything he had taught them over the years. Military tactics, engineering principles, medical knowledge, and philosophical discussions about courage and sacrifice. Teacher Jake, called a small voice. Jake turned to see Kyrian, a young Varanaki with golden fur and bright, curious eyes. She was only 8 years old, but already showed promise as a strategist. Yes, little one? Jake asked in fluent Varanaki. The story tablets say you fought the star demons with only your voice stick, she said, pointing to a carving that showed Jake with his rifle. But Grandfather Scifistories H says you also used your mind. How can a mind be a weapon? Jake knelt down. To her level? Show me your hands, he said. Carry single quote, and then held out her small hands, confused. These can hold tools, carry food, build houses, Jake said. But they can also comfort a friend or help someone who has fallen. The same hands can create or destroy, depending on what your mind tells them to do. So the mind chooses? Kyrian asked. Always, Jake said. A weapon is just metal and wood. A mind is what makes it dangerous or useful. The young Varanaki nodded seriously and went back to her copying. Jake smiled as he watched her work. The children born after the war had never known fear like their parents had. They grew up safe and protected, free to ask questions and learn. Jake, friend, called Elder Verhan from the entrance. He was middle-aged now, with streaks of silver in his blue-patterned fur. The Skywatchers have news. Jake followed Verhan to the communication center. The building housed the most advanced technology on Varan 7, built from salvaged parts and Jake's engineering knowledge. Radio equipment, basic computers, and sensor arrays allowed the Varanaki to monitor space around their world. What is it? Jake asked. A large fleet approaches, said Naleth, a young Varanaki female who operated the communications equipment. 20 ships, maybe more. They sent a message? Jake took the headset and listened to the recording. The voice was human, speaking in standard coalition language with a corporate accent. This is Executive Director Helen Walsh of Titan Mining Consortium. We are claiming salvage rights to the abandoned world designated Viren 7. All illegal settlers have 72 hours to evacuate or face forcible removal. Jake set down the headset and was quiet for a long moment. He had been expecting this day for years. The war was long over and the galaxy was settling into new patterns of trade and expansion. Remote worlds like Viren 7 were valuable now, especially ones with rich soil and mineral deposits. They think we are squatters, Verhan said. They do not know about the Varanaki nation. They know, Jake said grimly. They just don't care. Jake walked to the large map that covered one wall of the communication center. It showed every settlement, every hidden supply cache, every defensive position they had built over the years. The Varanaki had learned well from his teachings. Send word to all settlements, Jake said. Defense Plan 7, all families to the deep shelters within 6 hours. Teacher Jake, said Nalith carefully. The corporation ships have many weapons, more than the sky pirates who came before. I know, Jake said. But we're not the same people we were 20 years ago, are we? Jake spent the next day traveling between settlements, checking on the preparations. The Varanaki moved with calm efficiency, following procedures they had practiced for years. Children helped pack supplies while adults sealed the entrances to underground shelters. The tunnels Jake had taught them to dig connected every major settlement on the continent. In the main settlement, Jake found Sirenth waiting for him. The old elder was very frail now, his fur almost completely white, but his mind remained sharp. The young ones are ready, Sirine 8 said. They have learned your lessons well. I hope they won't need to use them, Jake said. The Morrison Guard stands ready, Sirenth continued. 50 of our best fighters, trained in your ways. They await your orders. Jake nodded. The Morrison Guard was an elite unit of Varanaki warriors, volunteers who had dedicated their lives to protecting their people. They were not as skilled as human soldiers, but they knew their land and they fought with the fury of those defending their homes. And the young teacher? Sirine H asked. Jake's expression softened. Sarah is safe in the deep shelter with the other teachers. She wanted to fight, but someone needs to protect the children if things go wrong. Sarah Blake was a human refugee who had arrived on Viren 7 3 years ago. Her transport had been attacked by pirates, and Jake had rescued her from the wreckage. She was a teacher from the core worlds, kind and intelligent, and she had fallen in love with both Jake and the peaceful Varanaki way of life. She cares for you, Sirenth said gently. I care for her too, Jake admitted. But this is my responsibility. I won't let her share the danger. The corporate fleet arrived exactly 72 hours after their first message. Jake watched from a hidden observation post as 20 ships took positions around the planet. They were sleek and modern, with corporate logos painted on their hulls. These were not pirates or raiders. They were a legal business operation with government backing. Jake's radio crackled to life. This is Executive Director Walsh. We are beginning preliminary mining surveys. Any individuals remaining on the surface will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. This is Jake Morrison, Jake replied. I'm speaking for the Varanaki people. This is their world and they're not leaving. There was a pause. Then Walsh's voice came back, sounding surprised. Morrison? Are you the Skywalker we've been hearing about? Some people call me that, Jake said. Mr. Morrison, I've read your military file. You're a decorated veteran with an honorable service record. Surely you understand the legal situation here. This world was abandoned during the war. It's open territory now. The Varanaki never left, Jake said. They've been here for thousands of years. This is their home. The Varanaki are not recognized as a spacefaring species, Walsh replied. They have no legal claim to this world under galactic law. We're prepared to relocate them to a suitable reservation world. Jake's jaw tightened. That's not happening. Mr. Morrison, We have 20 ships and 500 security personnel. You have what, a few dozen farmers with hunting rifles? Be reasonable. I'm being very reasonable, Jake said. I'm giving you a chance to leave peacefully. Walsh laughed. You're outnumbered 20-1. This is over before it starts. Jake looked out at the beautiful landscape around him. Fields of grain swayed in the wind. Varanaki homes curved gracefully between ancient trees. Children's toys lay scattered in gardens where families had played just hours before. You're right about one thing, Jake said. This is over before it starts. The first corporate landing. Craft touched down near the main settlement an hour later. 50 armored soldiers stepped out, expecting to find a few frightened farmers. Instead, they found empty buildings and an eerie silence. Control, this is landing Team Alpha, the team. Leader reported, no contacts. The settlement appears abandoned. Maintain position, Welsh's voice came through their radios. Begin search pattern. The corporate soldiers spread out through the settlement, their weapons ready. They moved professionally, but they were used to intimidating civilian populations. Not fighting a real war, Jake watched from concealment as the soldiers approached the central square, right where he wanted them. Now, he whispered into his radio, the Morrison Guard struck like lightning. Varanaki fighters emerged from hidden positions, their weapons trained on the surprised soldiers. The corporate troops found themselves surrounded by enemies who seemed to appear out of nowhere. Drop your weapons, Jake called out, stepping into the open. You're surrounded? The corporate team leader raised his rifle, but Jake was already moving. 20 years of training Varanaki fighters had kept him sharp. He disarmed the soldier with a move that was both gentle and completely effective. Tell your boss, Jake said as he helped the man to his feet, that the Varanaki people are not going anywhere. If she wants this world, she have to go through me. The soldier looked around at the 50 Varanaki weapons pointed at his team. You can't fight all of us, Jake smiled. I don't have to fight all of you. I just have to make it cost more than you're willing to pay. Above them, the corporate fleet waited for news from the surface. They had expected an easy victory against a legendary figure who had become more myth than man. They were about to learn that some legends were very real indeed. 35 years had passed since Jake Morrison first landed on Varan 7. His hair was now completely white, and his movements were slower than they used to be. But his mind remained sharp, and his determination burned as bright as ever. Jake stood in the underground command center, studying intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The news was not good. The hegemony of Salis, a militaristic empire from the Outer Rim, had conquered 12 worlds in the past 2 years. Their fleet was massive, their soldiers were well-trained, and they showed no mercy to anyone who opposed them. They're coming here, said Commander Lisa Chun, Jake's second-in-command. Lisa was a former coalition officer who had arrived on Varan 7. 5 years ago, drawn by stories of the legendary Skywalker, she had stayed to help train the planetary defense forces when, Jake asked. Our scouts report a hegemony fleet massing at the Korvax system, Lisa said. 300 ships, maybe more? They'll be here within the week. Jake nodded grimly. He had been preparing for this day for decades. The hegemony had heard about the wealthy agricultural world defended by a single human and his primitive allies. They thought it would be an easy conquest. Alert all defense stations, Jake said. Begin Operation Sanctuary. Sarah Blake entered the command center, her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. She was 60 now, but still moved with the energy of someone half her age. She had become Jake's wife 15 years ago, and together they had raised 3 Varanaki children whose parents had died in pirate raids. The evacuation is complete, Sarah reported. All civilians are in the deep shelters. The children are scared, but the teachers are keeping them calm. Jake took her hand. This is different from the corporate raids. The hegemony doesn't take prisoners, I know, Sarah said. But we're different too, we're ready. Jake looked around the command center. The walls were covered with maps, tactical displays, and communication equipment. Everything had been built by hand over the years, using salvaged parts and careful engineering. It was not as advanced as military installations in the core worlds, but it worked. "Sir," called Lieutenant Ben Roberts from the communications station. Ben was a young human who had crash-landed on Veron 7 during a merchant run. Like many others, he had chosen to stay and help defend the world. "Long-range sensors are picking up the hegemony fleet?" They just jumped into the system. Jake walked to the main display screen. The enemy fleet was enormous, filling the tactical display with red dots. He counted over 400 ships, from small fighters to massive battlecruisers. The hegemony had brought enough firepower to conquer an entire sector. "Open a channel," Jake said. A face appeared on the screen. It belonged to a tall, reptilian alien with yellow eyes and sharp teeth. His uniform was covered with medals and rank insignia. "I am Admiral Vashtar of the Hegemony Navy," the alien said. "You will surrender immediately or face total annihilation." "I'm Jake Morrison," Jake replied calmly, "and you're not welcome here." Vashtar's eyes narrowed. "The famous Skywalker. I had hoped to meet you in person before I killed you." "You're welcome to try," Jake said. "You have 1 hour to surrender," Vashtar continued. "After that, we will begin orbital bombardment. Your little world will burn." The screen went dark. Jake turned to his staff. "All units to battle stations. Begin Phase 1. The Hegemony fleet moved into attack formation around Veron 7. Their ships were sleek and deadly, armed with the latest weapons technology. Admiral Vashtar smiled as he watched his forces deploy. This would be over quickly. "Admiral," reported his tactical officer, "sensors are detecting some kind of energy buildup on the planet's surface." "Defensive shields, most likely," Vashtar said. "Begin bombardment." The first wave of hegemony ships opened fire on the planet. Energy beams and missile salvos streaked down toward the surface. But instead of hitting settlements and farms, the weapons struck empty fields and abandoned buildings. "Sir," the tactical officer said, "we're not hitting anything important. The planet appears to be evacuated." "Impossible," Vashtar growled. "Scan deeper." Deep beneath the surface of Veron 7, Jake watched the bombardment through periscope cameras. The hegemony was wasting ammunition on targets that didn't matter. Every shot they fired was one less shot they could use later. "Phase 2, Jake ordered, "hidden." Launch sites across the planet opened simultaneously. Hundreds of missiles streaked upward, launched from silos that Jake had spent decades building and camouflaging. They were not advanced weapons, but they were numerous and they were aimed at specific targets. The missiles struck the hegemony fleet like a swarm of angry insects. Most were intercepted by defensive systems, but some got through. 3 destroyers exploded in brilliant flashes of light. A cruiser lost its main engines and began spinning out of control. "What was that?" Vashtar demanded. "Surface to space missiles, sir," his tactical officer reported. "Hundreds of them. They're launching from concealed positions all over the planet." "Find those launch sites and destroy them," Vashtar ordered. But the launch sites were already gone. Jake had designed them to fire once and then seal themselves. The hegemony would waste hours trying to find targets that no longer existed. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet." Jake's voice came through the ship's speakers. "Admiral, you just lost 3 ships to farmers with homemade rockets. How do you think the rest of this is going to go?" Vashtar snarled, "Land the assault troops. I want that human's head on my wall." The hegemony landing craft descended toward the planet in massive waves. Thousands of soldiers in powered armor dropped from the sky, ready to crush any resistance. They landed in what appeared to be perfect formation on the main continent. Then the ground exploded beneath them. Jake had spent 35 years turning Veron 7 into a fortress. Every field, every forest, every hill had been prepared for this moment. Hidden mines detonated as the hegemony troops advanced. Concealed bunkers opened fire from unexpected directions. The peaceful farmland became a killing field. "Contact front," screamed a hegemony sergeant as his squad came under fire. "We're taking casualties." The Morrison Guard emerged from their hiding places like ghosts. Varanaki fighters who had trained for decades in the art of war moved through the landscape with deadly precision. They knew every tree, every rock, every hiding place. The hegemony soldiers were fighting an entire world that had been turned into a weapon. "Fall back to the landing zones," ordered the hegemony ground commander. "Regroup and call for orbital support." But there were no landing zones anymore. The hegemony had landed their troops in carefully chosen areas that Jake had prepared as traps. Now the soldiers found themselves cut off from escape, surrounded by enemies who seemed to know their every move. Jake watched the battle from his command center. The tactical display showed hegemony forces scattered across the continent, isolated and confused. His decades of planning were working perfectly. "Sir," reported Lisa Chun, "the hegemony is requesting reinforcements from their fleet. They're calling for massive orbital bombardment." "Let them," Jake said. Phase 3. More hidden missile batteries opened fire, this time targeting the hegemony fleet's capital ships. The weapons were larger now, built into mountainsides and powered by geothermal energy. They struck with the force of small nuclear weapons. Admiral Vashtar felt his flagship shake as explosions rocked the hull. "Damage report. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12, his executive officer reported. "Main weapons offline. We're losing atmosphere." "How is this possible?" Vashtar demanded. "They're primitives." "Sir," the tactical officer said, "I think we severely underestimated their capabilities." On the planet's surface, Jake allowed himself a small smile. The hegemony had expected to find a few farmers with hunting rifles. Instead, they had found a planet-sized fortress defended by people who had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment. "Open a channel to the hegemony fleet," Jake said. Admiral Vashtar's battered face appeared on the screen. "You cannot." "When?" he snarled. "We have more ships, more soldiers." "You had more ships?" Jake corrected. "I count 37 hegemony vessels destroyed or disabled." "Your ground forces are trapped and cut off?" "Your supply lines are broken. How long do you think you can keep this up?" "We will fight to the last ship," Vashtar declared. "That can be arranged," Jake said. "But I'm offering you a better deal. Take your remaining ships and leave. Never come back. Tell the galaxy that Van 7 is protected." Vashtar stared at the human on his screen. The legendary Skywalker looked old and tired, but his eyes still held the fire that had made him famous across the galaxy. "You would let us go?" The Admiral asked. "I'm not a monster," Jake said. "I just want to protect my people. Leave now, and you can tell your superiors that this world costs more than it's worth." The hegemony fleet began withdrawing within the hour. They left behind thousands of soldiers, countless weapons, and their reputation as an unstoppable force. Word of their defeat would spread quickly through the galaxy. Jake Morrison, the Skywalker, had turned back the mightiest invasion fleet in recent history. He had done it with careful planning, intimate knowledge of his terrain, and the absolute loyalty of people who trusted him with their lives. As the last hegemony ship disappeared into hyperspace, Jake felt the weight of his 73 years. Jake Morrison died on a quiet morning in late spring. He was 93 years old and had spent the last week of his life sitting in his garden, watching the Varanaki children play among the flowers he had planted decades ago. Sarah held his hand as he passed peacefully in his sleep, his face calm and content. The news of his death spread across Varan 7 within hours. Varanaki families traveled from every corner of the planet to pay their respects to the Skywalker who had protected them for 58 years. They came not with tears of sorrow, but with songs of celebration for a life well lived. Elder Kyrian, now a middle-aged leader with silver streaks in her golden fur, stood before the great hall of memory where Jake's body lay in state. She had been the curious child who once asked him how a mind could be a weapon. Now she spoke for an entire world. "Jake Morrison came to us from the sky," she said to the thousands gathered in the square. "He was not born here, but he chose to make this his home. He was not born Varanaki, but he became our greatest protector. He was just one human, but he taught us that one person can change everything." The funeral lasted 3 days. Representatives came from dozens of worlds to honor the man who had become a legend. Former coalition soldiers, trading captains, diplomats, and refugees all made the journey to Verin 7. They wanted to see the place where Jake Morrison had made his stand and to pay respects to the human who had chosen duty over comfort. Commander Lisa Chun, now an old woman herself, spoke at the ceremony. Jake never wanted to be worshipped, she said. He just wanted to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. He taught us that being a hero isn't about having special powers or fancy weapons. It's about making the right choice when it matters most. Sarah Blake, now 85 and frail, placed a simple marker on Jake's grave. It read exactly what he had requested: Jake Morrison, soldier, teacher, friend. He chose to stay, but Jake's death was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of something larger. The Codex of Morrison, the collection of his teachings and military strategies, was already being studied in academies across the galaxy. Human military officers came to Verin 7 to learn the tactics that had defeated the hegemony invasion. The planet had become a pilgrimage site for soldiers and strategists who wanted to understand how one man had turned farmers into warriors 10 years after Jake's death. A young coalition cadet named Alex Murphy arrived on Verin 7. He was researching defensive strategies for his graduation thesis. The Veranaki welcomed him warmly, as they did all visitors who came to learn about their protector. "Tell me about the Skywalker," Alex asked Elder Kyrian as they walked through the museum that had been built around Jake's old house. "He was not a god," Kyrian said firmly. "He was careful to teach us that. He was a human being who made a choice to help others. But that choice changed our entire world." She led Alex to a wall covered with photographs and documents. Images showed Jake training Veranaki fighters, teaching children, working in the fields, and planning defenses. In every picture he looked tired but determined. "He could have left," Kyrian continued. "Many times ships came that could have taken him back to human space. He always said no. This was his home." Alex studied a tactical map that showed the defensive positions Jake had built across the planet. Even with modern military training, he was amazed by the sophistication of the network. Every hill, every valley, every settlement was part of a massive defensive system that had taken decades to create. "How did he convince your people to build all this?" Alex asked. "He didn't convince us," Kyrian said. "He taught us why it was important. Jake never gave orders. He explained things and let us choose. But once we understood what he was trying to protect, we all wanted to help." Alex visited the deep shelters where civilians had hidden during the various attacks over the years. The tunnels were extensive and well supplied, capable of keeping the entire population safe for months. Jake had thought of everything, from air filtration to food storage to medical facilities. "He spent 50 years building this," said Ben Roberts, now an old man who served as the planet's chief of security. "Every day he worked on making us safer. Even when there was no immediate threat, he kept planning and preparing." "Wasn't he ever wrong?" Alex asked. "Didn't he ever make mistakes?" Ben smiled. "Of course he did. Jake failed at plenty of things. His first attempts at teaching Veranaki combat tactics were disasters. His early defensive plans had huge flaws. But he learned from every mistake and kept trying to do better." Alex spent a month on Verin 7, studying Jake's methods and interviewing people who had known him. What impressed him most was not the military genius, but the quiet dedication. Jake had spent decades doing small, unglamorous tasks that made life better for everyone around him. "He fixed water pumps," said Naleth, now an elderly communications specialist. "He helped with harvests. He taught children to read. He settled disputes between neighbors. Being the Skywalker wasn't just about fighting enemies. It was about being part of the community." The Morrison Guard still existed, though it was now more of an honor society than a military unit. Young Veranaki competed for the chance to join. Not because they expected to fight wars, but because it represented the highest ideals of service and protection. "Jake taught us that strength isn't about being the biggest or having the best weapons," explained Captain Thyronvol the Current, commander of the Guard. Strength is about being willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Alex's final interview was with Sarah Blake, who lived quietly in the house she had shared with Jake for 30 years. Despite her age, her mind was still sharp, and she spoke about her husband with obvious love and pride. "People always want to know if Jake regretted staying here," Sarah said, as they sat in the garden Jake had tended for so many years. "The answer is no. He found his purpose on this world. He found his family, he found peace." "Do you think he knew how famous he would become?" Alex asked. Sarah laughed. "Jake would have hated all the attention. He just wanted to help people and be left alone to do it. But I think he would be proud of what his teachings have accomplished." Alex looked around the peaceful settlement. Children played in the streets while their parents worked in the fields. It was hard to imagine this place as the site of epic battles that had become legend across the galaxy. "What do you think was the most important thing he taught?" Alex asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "That every person has value," she said finally. Jake could have seen the Varanaki as primitive aliens who weren't worth saving. Instead, he saw them as people with families and dreams and the right to live in peace. That's what made him willing to sacrifice everything for them. When Alex returned to Coalition space, he wrote his thesis about the defensive strategies of Varan 7, but he found himself writing just as much about the man who had created them. Jake Morrison had become more than a military tactician. He had become a symbol of what one person could accomplish through dedication and selfless service. 100 years after Jake's death, Varan 7 remained peaceful and prosperous. The planet had become one of the most successful agricultural worlds in the galaxy, supplying food to dozens of systems. The Varanaki had mastered advanced technology while maintaining their traditional way of life. Visitors still came to see Jake's grave and study his teachings. The simple marker had been joined by a larger monument, but the words remained the same. Jake Morrison, soldier, teacher, friend. He chose to stay. New cadets from the Coalition Academy made regular trips to Varan 7 as part of their training. They learned about tactics and strategy, but they also learned about duty and sacrifice. They discovered that true heroism wasn't about glory or recognition, but about making the right choice when others depended on you. Jake Morrison had never wanted to be worshipped as a god. But he had become something better, an inspiration that showed how one person's choice to help others could echo through the centuries, making the galaxy a better place for everyone.